just take a second here and just let you know we're going to start recording because we do have several people who want to watch this afterwards. So hopefully you see that we are recording now. So let me share my screen real quick and then we can get started. So welcome everybody to Prime Center at St. Louis University's presentation on the Missouri Statewide Student Growth Report that we're going to be releasing here shortly. Just so you know, we've had a lot of great feedback today and there's some more information that we want to add to the report. So we're going to hold this and actually release at 10 a.m. Thursday morning, just so you know right off the bat. So we have a little more time here to discuss the report, to take your feedback, to make a few last minute changes. We've already got some great ideas on some stuff we want to add, but just FYI that's going to be delayed just a little bit. As we go through here, I just want to give you a little bit of information about what Prime Center is. You may not be familiar with Prime Center. So it stands for Policy Research in Missouri Education. We started in 2019. We're an independent research center housed in St. Louis University, SLU, the School of Education. And our mission is really to provide better evidence on education issues. We want to support better policies. We want better outcomes for students and schools in Missouri. So that's kind of our mission and our focus in the kinds of data that we look into, the kind of research and reports that we do. And there's our website if you want more information. So you may know some of us, but in case you don't, here's kind of a look at our team. So Evan Rhinesmith is our executive director. He's going to walk us through some of the data today. I'm Sarah Potter. I'm new here at Prime, about a month or so as a communications manager. Ashley Donaldson-Burley is a project coordinator here at SLU with Prime Center, and Misty Jeffers is also new like me, a postdoctoral fellow here at the Prime Center. And then Gary Ritter is our Dean of the School of Education. He's going to walk us through a lot of the report information today because he has a lot of the background in the work. But just a quick overview for what we're doing today. We're going to look at why student growth matters. What is it? Why does it matter to us? We're going to look at how we actually created this Prime Growth Score. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that draft report and kind of get familiar with what we're doing. We're going to look at some of the table examples which have changed just in the time that we sent that report to you. And then we're going to look at kind of our next reports that we're doing, and we're going to take questions. We really do want this to be a discussion. So please let us know what thoughts and questions and suggestions you have for us as we go through the report today. But now I'm going to turn it over to Gary.
I'm on my way up. This is Dr. Mendoza. I just dropped the students off for the bus.
Are you able, Sarah, to help mute for folks?
Yeah,
help muting?
If you guys could mute yourselves, that would be really helpful. We're hearing some chatter here on the back end. So if everybody could mute, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Sarah.
So Gary, go right ahead.
Okay, great. And Sarah, we'll try to watch each other since you're driving so you can move forward. First of all, before we jump in, I just want to thank all of you. I know you're all doing unbelievably challenging work in schools right now. We're challenged in the School of Education at a university, and we're living in a place where 98% of us are vaccinated and everyone's an adult. So the challenges we're facing, I can't even, they pale in comparison to yours. So I'm grateful that you're willing to give the time to chat with us today. We're going to describe what this report is. And thanks to our new staff who's really focusing on communications, we're doing a better job of trying to make sure that our reports are disseminated to people who might care. And we're also trying to get feedback from stakeholders so that if we're doing something wrong, you have an opportunity to tell us so we can stop doing those things incorrectly. You know, we're all doing our best, but we certainly can benefit from guidance and advice. So this report is really focused on student growth. And why are we publishing this? As you know, there are lots of things schools do. And of course, 90% of what we do can't necessarily be measured by test scores. But often when we focus on the effectiveness of a school, we're focusing on the test score. And when we focus on the test score, I think we problematically focus really like a laser on proficiency rates, point in time scores. What did our kids know this year at this exact time? And what many of us who've studied this for years, and those of you who are in the field know, is what really matters is how well we move kids along from when they walk in the door at our school in the fall to when they leave in the spring. That's what we can do as educators. So we're certainly not responsible for and shouldn't be held accountable for what students are walking in with, but we certainly can have influence over how well we move them forward throughout the year. And that's why we're really moved by the DESE growth scores. These are the things when we think about tests, we think we should be focusing more on growth scores. So our Prime Student Growth Report aims to shift the focus by highlighting schools that really have been performing well in terms of the measures of student growth published by DESE. And I think this is a particularly important time to be thinking about it because as we've all seen, our test scores, our MAP scores have come out in recent weeks. And what we have are the point in time test scores from the pandemic influenced 2021 school year. And certainly there's a limit to what those scores can tell us. I think they'll form a good baseline for future reference, but in terms of what's gone on the past couple of years, it's hard to look at those scores as meaningful. Therefore, we're aiming to shift the focus today. So you might ask, why are we looking at 2019 growth scores? Because that's the focus of this report. We use the publicly available DESE 2019 school level student growth scores because they're the most recently available growth scores that are not influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are the stable growth scores that were published based on spring 2019 test results. And they're not only the 18-19 school year. For those of you who know, and if you want to get into the weeds, the DESE growth scores are actually based on 3 years of growth. So they're stable scores that aren't influenced by one, let's say, atypically bad year. They're influenced by 3 years of growth. So they're stable. So what would we use these for? Why are we putting these out? In our view, these scores, which highlight schools that are fostering remarkable student growth, they can be used for a variety of reasons. Missouri educational leaders can know more about which schools are making consistent growth for a variety of reasons. These schools might be models. We might want to figure out what they're doing. We might want to invest in whatever models they're using, et cetera. It's important to know, because I think even many of us in the education world, when we are pressed to say, name the good schools, we might default to those schools that have high proficiency rates. And that's very different from growth. We might have high proficiency rates and not be seeing student movement at all. Or we might have low proficiency rates, but really be moving the students along. Our goal here is to move the public conversation when we talk about student test scores to focus on growth and not proficiency. If you walk away with one thing, that's what we're trying to get out today. Can we go back for one more second, Sarah? I jumped ahead and I apologize. We also, I think we want to highlight, we're going to find many schools that despite challenging circumstances, students coming in without high starting scores, students facing a lot of socio-demographic challenges, students facing high poverty levels, many schools are making growth in the face of that. And these schools can serve as models. And finally, if people get interested more than we already are, and I know many of you probably know the inside information, and you might even be looking at NCE scores, but most are not. So we hope this might encourage some school leaders to dig into your own school and classroom level growth scores. You might find out you have some grade levels that are really knocking it out of the park, or some subject areas where you're struggling compared to others in ways that you might not have seen with just the proficiency scores. Thanks, Sarah. So what is this prime growth score? I mean, why don't we just say, hey, go look at the NCE, go look at the growth NCE. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Missouri growth NCE, because we can't talk about our growth score without. Talk about why we created something that's a little bit of a derivation, a little different, and how we think you should look at it. And again, I hope if you have questions, I know that Sarah and some of the other Prime staff are watching. you have questions, raise your hand or jump in. We're happy that we want this to be a conversation. So what's the Missouri growth model? As many of you know, some of you from DESE are right here on the call. DESE launched the Missouri growth model in 2013, focused on math and ELA scores. This Missouri growth model essentially compares student growth scores, student test scores in a given year to what they would be predicted to get. And by what they would be predicted to get, that means how did students who started at the same point they did in that year, how did they do? So if you ended up growing during that year much more than your peers, you earned a high growth score. If you ended up growing in a given year at a lesser rate than did your peers, you had a relatively low growth score. And these scores were represented in something called NCE units, which we're going to talk about on the next page. And to do this, you need at least 2 consecutive student tests. So this works for students in grades 4 through 8. So what did we see? We saw this, the graph on the right will make it clear that we look at these NCE scores. That's a statistical term, is normal curve equivalent. Doesn't really matter. But what I think matters there is what we see is the way the NCE works is it sets the mean score at 50. So if there's a student who grows at the average of all the typical students who look like her or him, that student would have a 50. And then that student could have scores all the way up to a 99 or all the way down to a 1, depending on if they grew more quickly or less quickly than did their peers. While each student has a wide variety of scores ranging from 1 to 99, when you start averaging out these student scores at the school level, schools, as you can see from this graphic, had really tightly compressed scores, ranging essentially from 45 to 55. And in fact, 81% of the districts, 4 out of 5 districts or schools, fell within scores of 48 to 52. So the challenge, of course, if you're a consumer of this data, if you're a parent or maybe even a typical teacher or certainly a typical policymaker, you might look and say we have an NCE of 52. All right, that's roughly like the mean score of 50. Well, actually not. It's way higher than 50. And 48 is much lower than 50. But the scale's so compressed, it's hard to tell. So what we see is the challenge is that the difference between high and low growth schools is very small in raw numbers. So we wanted to deal with that. So we created what we called our prime growth score. It's just a transformation or a translation of the Missouri NCE you just saw. It's listed off to the right. And we used a mean of 85 and a standard deviation of 5. Don't worry about the stats behind this. But the result is a scale that instead of landing on a mean of 50, where almost everybody is in between 48 and 52, we placed it on a mean of 85, where almost everybody has a score between 100 and 70. And that scale might seem familiar to you because, of course, when we think of grading our students, we think of scores between 60 and 100 or 70 and 100, right? Where scores in the 80 to 90 range, those are Bs. Those are pretty good. Scores above 90 are As. They're really good. And scores below 80 are ones we start to begin to worry about. They're Cs or Ds. So similarly here, if you look at the screen, we have almost everyone. These are the elementary school scores, for example. A vast majority, 70-ish% of our elementary schools had scores between 80 and 90. But there were a good number that had scores above 90 and above 95. So what we've done to the NCE score is we've dropped it onto a new scale with numbers that we hope are recognizable and familiar. Again, an 85 is a typical score. You're growing at the same rate as a typical school. If you're underneath 80, you're growing less well than a typical school. And if you're above a 90, you're growing much more quickly than a typical school. That's the scale. Pretty darn simple, we hope. Pardon me, Sarah. Okay, thank you. And so what do we have? You can see the difference right in front of each other. It's just a wider distribution on our prime score than the previous score. It does not change the order. So if you were the top school on NCE, you are the top school on our prime metric. If you had a 50 on the NCE, you have an 85, you have the mean score on our prime metric. There is no fundamental change. We're just laying it out with a little more spread in the distribution, and we are placing it on a scale that we hope makes more sense. Thanks, Sarah. So what's this report we're putting together based on that? So we have taken all of the 1,700 or so schools across 546 districts and 9 regions, and we have translated their NCE growth scores from 2019 to Prime's growth scores. And this report is simply to highlight and applaud those schools where students are showing outrageously high growth, really high growth. So we break it into 3 different types of schools. You might notice there are no high schools here because the NCE growth scores are really based on the 3 to 8 exams, the grade 3 to 8 exams. So we can't really include high schools here. So we rank the top 20 schools in both English and math, and we do it in elementary, we do it in middle, and then we do it in this sort of combo version, elemental, that includes K to 8, PK to 8, and all sorts of other versions of schools that include both elementary and middle school grades. We show the schools that are leading in student growth for overall achievement, but we also show the top 20 schools for subgroup achievement. So schools that are doing a really nice job serving students whom we have traditionally underserved, students at the margin. And as you know, students in what often has been called the super subgroup includes students who are from free and reduced lunch populations, Black or Hispanic populations, English language learners, students with disabilities. These students are students classified as super subgroups. So we think this ranking highlights schools that might serve as models for doing a great job of working for students, again, whom we have traditionally underserved, and ideally closing persistent and stubborn achievement and opportunity gaps. Here's what this is going to look like. Here's what a table is going to look like. And the point isn't the particular schools in this table. This table happens to represent the top growth elementary schools in English language arts based on school-wide scores. And there are a couple quick important things to note. You see, for example, let's pick York Elementary, the 8th ranked school with a score of 96.9. That school has a percent proficient advance of roughly 50%. Not the kind of school we might have been praising before. You know, the percent proficient advance aren't as great as maybe some others, but really great stuff is going on because the growth score is really high, and this school is serving students with an 86.6% free reduced lunch rate. Move up to school 2, Cambridge Elementary. Their students are only earning proficient and advanced scores at around 35.5%. But again, a relatively high free and reduced lunch rate, and there's a lot of growth going on in that school as well over in the Kansas City region. And there are lots of others. Again, the point here is to highlight schools that we might not have been otherwise highlighting, where really good stuff is happening. And hopefully you'll notice that we see schools that come in with high proficient and advanced scores and low proficient and advanced scores, and you can still grow from either space. And you'll notice we also do the same for subgroup achievement. So we've got schools that are serving students, again, who we have traditionally underserved and who are doing a great job in growing those students. Some of these schools in this list overlap with the overall school-wide, and some of these do not overlap. And again, we're seeing schools that serve students that are highly free and reduced eligible, or in this case, a high fraction of their students are in the super subgroup. Border Star Montessori in line 7, 100% of its students are in the super subgroup for one reason or another. So those students are students, again, whom we typically have not served well, and they're growing at a score of 97.5, the 8th highest score in the entire state amongst subgroup achievement. And this is from roughly 1,000 elementary schools. So this is a big deal. Now, to talk about what does the star represent in the top 3? Thank you, Cheryl. If we could pop back for just a second. The star in the top 3 represents, Sarah, are you moving back for us? Thank you. It represents, Cheryl, that these schools actually had scores slightly higher than 100, but we cap it at 100. So these schools might have had a score of 101.9, 102.3, but we cap it at 100, so it makes sense. Thanks for the question. And then, if you want to imagine what these schools look like if you want to download the scores for all of your schools, you can look at our downloadable data set. And Evan can talk about that, please.
Yeah, so in the downloadable data set, we basically have multiple tabs that you can select from, showing the overall statewide growth where every school that's included in the analysis is combined together. Then we also have separate tabs for the 3 separate groups we're looking at: the elementary schools, the elemental schools, and the middle schools, where you can dig into demographics. You can filter down by region, you can sort it by the percent FRL eligible, whatever your heart so desires, to cut the data and look at it so you can find the schools that might be the most similar to yours and just sort of see how you're performing. Maybe that's a school that you would want to collaborate with to maybe find some of the answers that they might have found for their students.
Thanks, Evan.
Go forward one, Sarah.
We have a question to, can you send a link directly to the data from Louise?
Yes, we'll be making the data set available. And once we have it uploaded to the website, we'll send the link to our participants here.
And Evan, I think we're trying to have the release coincide with the release of the report.
Correct.
Okay.
So this next slide will be the front page of the Excel spreadsheet, where you are actually able to do some dynamic lookup. So you would be able to select your district or any district that you have an interest in, and then select the school from within that district. Here we're highlighting Blue Hills Elementary School, which sits right about smack in the middle of both the percent proficient and advanced, right about the state average, and the overall growth score that we observe for English language arts. As you do this, you'll be able to highlight the school of interest within that scatter plot and find where your school sits, both in terms of growth and proficiency, and sort of see how that lines up. So we're pretty excited for you to be able to interact with this.
So Cheryl is asking, is there a place where cell sizes? I assume enrollment is the entire school.
So Cheryl, that's a good question. I answered it with a typo and bad grammar in the chat. I apologize, I was trying to hurry. So cell size, you're right, is not the same as enrollment, and cell size will be included in the downloadable data set. And I think that we're still working on the data set today. The downloadable data set will be a little more, I guess, aesthetically pleasing with bigger headings, clearer headings, not like the data set we might just download from like the US government website or something with short names. So we're going to make it clean and good looking for you. So thank you. Thanks, Evan. In this October 14th report, the one that's coming out Thursday at 10 a.m., you can tell we have a communications person on our team because we have a date of release as compared to a bunch of academics who would say sometime Thursday. So thank you, Sarah, for making sure that we are efficient and official. This report will have, it'll just be in 3 sections, very straightforward. Section 1, I mean, there'll be an introductory section, kind of, which you've seen, explaining what the growth model is and why we think it's a good idea to pay attention to growth rather than point in time status. The same things we talked about earlier today. Section 1 will be all about elementary scores. We'll give you the top 20 ELA scores. Again, first in school-wide achievement, and then next in subgroup achievement. Then we'll do the same thing for math. Then we'll have follow-up sections that look the same for elemental and then middle. So there will be 12 top 20 tables. 6 listed there times 2 for the overall and for the subgroup. 12 tables of schools. Now, if you move forward, we spent a lot of time creating this growth score for the schools across the state. Our goal is to highlight what's going on that's positive in Missouri education. Now, you might dig in and look and say, where are we struggling and how can we improve that? And that's fine. But what we're doing here is highlighting the highest growth, top achieving growth schools. And we're going to err on the side of being overly inclusive rather than being overly strict. So our report 2, which is going to come out in 2 to 3 weeks after the first report, we're going to break this up by regions. Because as I said earlier, we've got about 1,000 elementary schools that have growth scores. So showing you the top 20 math scores, I mean, you notice those scores only included schools with scores of 95 or above. There are a lot of schools with scores of 90, 91, 92, doing a great job with well above average growth that we'd like to highlight. So what we're going to do in report 2 is we're going to highlight the top performing schools by region. So we're going to have the top performing schools in the St. Louis region, the Kansas City region, the Boot Hill region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for all 9 regions. Now, we might not do 20 per region because that would be a lot, but we're going to, again, err on the side of providing more good news rather than less about schools where growth is really occurring and is exceeding what would be expected for the students. So that's going to be, a lot of schools are going to be identified. I'm sure a lot of your schools are going to be identified in 2 weeks when we come out, or in 3 weeks when we come out with that growth report by region. And then finally, one we're particularly excited about at St. Louis University is report 3, the Beating the Odds report. And here we're going to only include schools with high concentrations of students in the subgroup achievement category, the highest poverty students. And we're going to highlight schools that are exhibiting high growth for these students in particular. Again, one of the challenges we all face are it's much more challenging for students when they have many other hurdles around them to focus on school, but yet lots of students and lots of educators and lots of schools do a great job of moving academic growth forward in these circumstances. And we want to tell these stories and we want to get those names out there. And so that's what's going to happen in report 3. We're going to focus on the top growth schools who are educating students with high levels of poverty. And that's going to be 4 to 6 weeks from this Thursday. We don't want to commit in case we run into some trouble on building the reports, but these reports will be done. This next one will be in October and the final one will be in November. So what did we find by digging into this? We found that schools earning high prime growth scores run the gamut, perhaps not surprisingly, from large to small, from urban to rural, from schools where students start off at very high levels of proficiency, or schools where students are starting off at relatively low levels, schools that are public charters, schools that are traditional public, schools in all regions of the state. In all corners of the state, we have schools showing fantastically high levels of growth for students. And we think it's a good time while you're out there facing the challenges of the pandemic, some students trying to come back to school for the first time in a year and a half. We want to put out good news. And we want to, again, what we hope is people walk away saying, oh yeah, when I want to know if a school is doing well or what's going on in a school, I want to pay attention to growth. I don't want to pay attention to status alone. Sure, you can look at status, but status in many ways just tells us who's serving a wealthy population. We really want to focus on growth. And that's really the goal for this report. And we're grateful that you spent time chatting with us. and we'd be happy to answer any questions. I'll quickly jump in, and maybe we can make it easier, Sarah, we can pull the slides down and get us all on the screen. Who will see the report? Dr. Mendoza. We're publishing it on the website. We're using publicly available data, nothing fancy, no individual student level data. It's all publicly available data, and we'll put it on our Prime website for anyone to see, both the report and the downloadable database. And thank you, Dr. Neal, for making the time to be here.
If you have people from coming in, moving into the state, where would they go to find this data?
That's great, thank you. We'll put in the chat box our website at sluprime.org, www.sluprime.org, and that's where we publish our reports on the data. That's where we'll publish the link to the downloadable database. It's up there now. I don't think we're planning on posting this video, but maybe we can. I would have put on more makeup and been a little more, tried to be a little more formal had I thought ahead. But so I'll ask our communications leader, Sarah, can tell us what to do, and we will likely follow her lead. That's a good thought. And we're interested in your opinions on if we should. We hope it was clear at explaining what is coming out in the report. I'm really grateful that Sarah, thanks to her career in communications, told us, hey, it's a good idea to preview these reports. We're previewing it with school leaders. We're previewing it with some of the statistical folks who gave us advice on if we should do this, how should we do this? And so we had a technical advisory group to be clear to us, whether we were doing something stupid, we were overlooking something, making any horrible mistakes. And they've indicated that this is a good idea. We've stayed true to the underlying statistical characteristics of the growth score.
We had a question, sorry to interrupt. We had a question from Amy St. John asking us if we're going to continue this work with the FY21 data.
So our whole goal is to amplify the growth data. And I think we will do it with FY21, but I will share with you that with FY21, it will be loaded down with caveats. We haven't made the decision yet. So we'll probably wait to see what the reaction is to this report. If folks like looking at growth, if they find it valuable, we hope they do. We're trying to shift the public conversation so we can applaud those schools who are nurturing high growth. And so we'll wait to see how you react and how people react. As long as we keep the focus on growth, we're okay. But we know the FY21 data do not provide a good overview of what's going on in schools, because gosh, half the students haven't been in schools for this time. But if doing the growth data on these numbers might at least shift the conversation from focusing on the raw scores and the point in time scores and the status scores, we could certainly be compelled to do it. Are there any obvious mistakes, things we should watch out for?
There's a comment from Cheryl. She's saying we need, go ahead.
Cheryl says that's a very good point. That's one of the reasons I'd be very nervous about FY21 and why we're going back to FY19. I mean, as we think about, we're hoping there might be some spotlights on success. We have found even in some of our local school partners, school leaders have said, wow, I didn't know that XYZ school down the street had such a high growth score. So even school leaders don't know. And it's not surprising. For the past 2 years, we've been busy trying to figure out, are we going to require our faculty get vaccinated? How are we going to test kids? How are we going to keep them 6 feet apart? It's not at all surprising that we haven't been able to dig deeply into the recesses of DESE data and look at our NCE scores. So again, we just want to amplify this score.
Other questions, Dr. Mendoza?
I just wanted to say, is there some kind of way where you can share with the community and making the connection and how this is closing the achievement gap, and mention something about equity and diversity, how all of this is, contributing to the success of the data? Because that's the discussion within the community and the schools.
Thanks, Dr. Mendoza. That's an excellent point. I think here, our role, the way we envision it at SLU Prime, I mean, we live at St. Louis University. Our mission at St. Louis University is higher purpose, greater good. We are committed to social justice. Our role in this research center is to share evidence that supports the pursuit of equity, the pursuit of justice. So I hope that it is used in that spirit. So we use it to say, where are we really serving kids well? Where are those sort of beacons of growth where we can follow up and use what we've learned at schools A, B, and C to support the work that needs to be done at other schools. So we're going to do everything we can to try and encourage folks and everything you encourage us to do, to encourage folks to use these data to help serve kids better. That's our purpose. That we're not experts in how to teach kids. We are pretty good at organizing data and presenting data and analyzing data. That's the role we're trying to play here. And we hope that the information is valuable to you who are the experts in the schools. I hope that answer is helpful. You know, Jennifer, so I'll say out loud the question because I'm reading the chat clearly. Jennifer asked, might you release information or perhaps a template with instructions on how districts can analyze their in-house data based on the prime growth model? Our organization might be a lot like many of yours, where the folks who have to do the work might have winced when they saw my eyes light up, when I saw what a great idea that is, because I don't have to actually do the work. But I do think that's a great idea. And a previous postdoc in our office, who's now off working in a district, mentioned one of the things she was most excited about was not only working on the data, but then building modules and seminars to help folks think about different ways to understand the data. Again, we're not the experts on what to do in schools, of course, but we can certainly help you understand the data better, help build modules and those sorts of things. So I think, Jennifer, if you give our staff a time to breathe after the final report, I can knock on their doors and say, okay, now why don't we build a module or two, a webinar or two on how you might use this. That sounds great. And I'd love to hear or read some comments on the chat if you imagine folks in your district might be interested in something like that, because we could do a webinar just like this and talk about how one might use the data. We spoke to a superintendent this morning, asked the exact same question, thought about how he might use the data at his individual schools, at his individual grade levels. And to be clear, one thing we mentioned this morning are the political considerations with this. Whenever we talk about data at a school level, people get nervous about data at a teacher level. And we use the scary terminology, teacher value added. You know, these are data, the only way anyone can look at individual student data is at the school level and at the district level. So you can do that to see which grade levels you think are knocking it out of the park, which might be struggling, but that's your own individual formative diagnostic work. That's not gotcha work. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to highlight the schools that are doing well. We're trying to increase the level of conversation around growth. So maybe school leaders do dig into those a little more. And I know many of you may be already doing it and you're just tuning in because you're curious what we're doing. But I know there are many school leaders across the state who are bogged down. And one of our jobs to support schools across the state are figure out what you need with regard to data. So putting together these modules they're absolutely in line with our mission. And we've got the folks who work in our office, Ashley, Misty, and Evan work with the data in our office. They're not doing this job because they love burying themselves in spreadsheets. Part of the reason we're doing this job is we love working with educators in the field. So that's actually fun work for us. So thanks for that question. And Cheryl raises some good points about, some districts are doing this internally anyway with their own STAR data. We can help you do it with these data if you wish. And again, that's exactly right. Looking at proficient and advanced might be helpful it is absolutely not the end all. And I would argue it's far less helpful than looking at, did students grow? Not, did they jump these 3 arbitrary bars? The bar between below basic and basic, the bar between basic and advanced, and the bar between advanced and proficient.
Great comments, thank you. Any other final comments or thoughts from the group? Well,
thank you all for your time.
Yep. Thanks everybody for joining us. As we've said, we will have this presentation available. We will have the report ready to go Thursday morning. So we'll send that all to you. Please share it. We're really going to try and make a big deal out of those top ranked schools on social media. You know, feel free to tag your high flying schools in your district, your educators that you know are doing an amazing job at those schools. We'd really like to celebrate them and highlight them with the report and get as much conversation going as we can all around student growth. So thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it and look for that report coming up on Thursday.